Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the daily edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, analyze the various different topics relevant for your prelims or for your mains examination. We shall be decluttering the various different concepts involved in those topics and make it simple for you when it comes to writing an answer or what to extract out of the topic. But before we get into the topic and the various different details around it, most of you who are preparing for the civil services, you have been concentrating upon the theoretical subjects and the theoretical aspect of knowledge. Reading about the policies, reading about the various different difficulties that the country faces, etc. But the job of a civil servant, the job of a bureaucrat, is much more than that. You need to understand the practical implications of the issues faced by the bureaucrats on the ground. What goes behind thinking about a policy and how a simple tweak in a policy can end up influencing lives of millions of people. Keeping that in mind and ensuring that you have a practical idea, practical knowledge about the functioning of the government, but most importantly, management of resources. We at Unacademy are launching a summit, a conclave, that shall be held on 20th and 21st of July, where you will get eminent personalities from various politicians, journalists, as well as senior bureaucrats, and also eminent personalities in their own field. This gives you a unique opportunity to improve your knowledge base, but also show an improvement in perspective. That is going to help you, be it at the level of the interview or be it at the level of the mains examination. So do attend this conclave. Join us live on 20th and 21st. The link for registration is given in the description below. Now, having said that, let us take a look at the topics that we are going to discuss today. Today, we are going to have for discussion 8 different topics from wide gamut of areas, from GS paper 2 to GS paper 3 and some relevance even in GS paper 1. So, the first topic that we are going to discuss is intergenerational equity as tax devolution criterion. Now that the budget period is approaching fast, this tax devolution between the center and the states will again gain traction. That is something that had been in news for the past 6 months almost, that has started gaining traction again. So what is this concept of intergenerational equity and intragenerational equity when it comes to tax devolution? We are going to take a look into that. This is going to be relevant for your GS paper 3. Then, choosing the right track to cut post-harvest losses. Agricultural sector is suffering quite significantly for the post-harvest losses, again relevant for your GS paper 3. And here, with the help of the article, the arguments of the article, we are also going to talk about how railways as a sector can benefit from this particular opportunity. In search of jobs, the problem of job creation, that is relevant for your GS paper 2 as well as GS paper 3. The problems with sub-caste reservation. This follows a Supreme Court's observation with regards to the reservation that needs to be given even within the caste groups. So what are the arguments in favor and the arguments against that have been represented by the article? That is something that we are going to declutter, relevant for your GS paper 2. Then on political representation of women, this is again GS paper 2. And so is the newly passed Maharashtra's public security bill. The criticism that is being leveled against it, that is again something that we are going to talk about. Now, couple of topics we are going to discuss very briefly, relevant for your prelims. So here, Railways relaxes the rules for Make in India for walkie-talkie sets. This follows the investigation in the Kanchenjunga accident which happened. Now, here we are going to use this particular article in order to discuss the benefits and the relevance of the Kavach system or the anti-collision system developed by RDSO and the railways. Then polls hit fresh public capital expenditure in Q1. So that is again something we are going to pick up for discussion. So without further ado, let us start the discussion for the first topic. The first topic talks about intergenerational equity as tax devolution criterion, which has appeared in page 6. Now, first of all, let us declutter this concept and let us break this article into simplistic pieces. So, when it comes to tax devolution, what does that mean? What do we mean by tax devolution criteria? Basically, you have the states earning some amount of taxes, and the remainder amount of money that they require, much of that is basically paid by the central government and also as a result of the borrowings that the governments take. Now, the point of contention for almost past 1 year, which has remained in news stories significantly, is the fact that many of the developed states, they have been feeling a kind of a grievance because they feel that the amount of contribution to the economic parameters that they make in the country's development, they are not getting that amount of tax devolution from the center. The argument is that high income states such as Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, they end up making significant amount of contribution to the national GDP. But when it comes to the share of money or the share of income that the central government gives to these states, they argue the proportion is not to the same level as is the case with the states like UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Odisha and so on. That has led to an increased amount of grievances being built up in some of the high income states. Particularly the states like Tamil Nadu and Karnataka is where they have gained a kind of a political fervor. But then, this particular article talks about the fact that when we talk about the tax devolution, there needs to be an intergenerational equity as well as intragenerational equity. What are those terms? Intergenerational equity, first of all. Intergenerational means what? From one generation to the other. So what is the concept behind it? Concept is very simple. The concept basically says that, look, our generation, for example, we are getting some services from the government. Services such as healthcare, services such as roads, electricity, maybe subsidized amount of rations, etc. Now for that, we end up paying some taxes. Now, the next generation should also get the same facilities or more, but then their financial burden should not increase. So in simple terms, the concept of intergenerational equity talks about that financial burden should not increase from one generation to another. Shouldn't increase from one generation to the next. Right? This is a simple thing. Now, why will it increase, if at all? Why should it increase or why will it increase? So here, you have to understand that the government has only two sources of getting money. Even though in our popular perception, the government is sitting on pile loads of money, but if you think about it, government has got only two sources. One is through taxes, the other is through borrowings. These are the only two sources from which the government can gain money. So, the income of the government is supported by two pools. One is the tax revenue, direct, indirect taxes, both of them. And the other is through the concept of borrowings. Borrowings from the international market, through the bond issuance, etc. Now, this income that the government gets, that is the income that it will give to the states as well, isn't it? For fulfillment of the various services, be it multiple different states, for example, they announce free bus rides or they announce, let's suppose, free electricity or any of those, subsidized ration as has been announced by the central government since the time of the COVID pandemic. This is the same money which will be used for construction of roads. This will be the same money which will be used for construction of infrastructure like railway stations, airports, etc. So the same money is getting devolved in all these areas. Now here, public will generally know the amount of taxes that they are paying. You and I, we both know the amount of tax that we are paying, direct and indirect. So if we are paying a higher amount of tax, our expectation also becomes that we should get a similar amount of services from the government as well. Now, if let's suppose the government's income is completely fulfilled by tax revenue, then what? The government will not have to go for borrowings, right? If the government doesn't take borrowings, means the government won't have to fulfill or repay that loans later on. So that would mean what? That the future generation doesn't have a financial burden on them. That is intergenerational equity, where the government of the day is not forced to borrow, and if they are not forced to borrow, then no financial burden in the future. But the reality is not this. The reality is that the governments basically, in order to provide the services, they need to borrow. And they keep on announcing various different schemes that, okay, that will be fulfilled by some money taken from this borrowing, some money taken from that borrowing, or the money from the central government, and the central government will borrow. What will happen? Eventually, you will have to pay that. And that is where you have the burden which is transferred to the next generation. So that intergenerational equity is a must, because India is a youthful population. And this youthful population going to enter into the working age group for the next decade and a half, you do not want a higher tax burden on that population. Now here, there is also this concept, what is also referred to in this article as the Ricardian equivalence theory. The Ricardian equivalence theory basically talks about the fact that is the Ricardian equivalence theory. Just the basic of it is what is required, not the in-depth knowledge of these theories. So, this Ricardian equivalence theory talks about the fact that whenever a government goes for borrowings, in that case, the savings rate of the economy or the savings rate of the household increases. What is the concept behind? So, when the borrowings increase, that is as per the theory. When the borrowings increase, that means household savings should go up. Now, what is the concept here? The concept is that if the government is basically trying to get the income through borrowing, means it is not touching the tax revenue. That means the tax rate is being kept constant. Tax rate is constant. It is being assumed that you also will have your income level which will increase year after year, even though nominal amount, but the income level will increase. If the income level increases but the tax rate is constant, means what? You are able to save much more. So that is the concept which argues that, okay, the government should go for borrowing. That will benefit the economy in the longer run by improving the household savings rate. But this theory is not valid, not applicable in Indian context. Why? Because in India, we do know that even though the tax rates have been kept consistent for a long period of time, the inflation is catching up. And that inflation is increasing means what? The household savings are not increasing anymore. Plus, to add on to that, out-of-pocket expenditure, be it on healthcare, be it on other services, that is also significantly huge in India. Why? Because the government services, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education, they are woefully inadequate in many parts of the country. Ideally, the government should pay for these services. The government should ensure that the government hospitals, the government educational institutions, they are the best in standards. But because it is not so, people pay out of their pocket. So the savings are not going up. So in India, despite the fact that the tax rate is constant, household savings are coming down. And borrowings are increasing, but still the household savings are coming down. So the Ricardian equivalence theory, which propagates or which postulates that you should go for more borrowing, that does not stand true here. So in order to achieve intergenerational equity in India, what do you need? You basically need an increase in tax revenue. And how do you get that? More revenue by the states, more income tax payers, better coverage of the tax paying community. So that is when the income tax or the tax revenue would increase and the borrowings level would decrease. Now coming to the concept of intragenerational equity. What does that mean? That basically talks about that within the same generation, you have a wide different types of demography. Within the same generation, you will have various different types of states. Let's suppose you consider the high income states. High income states. Then let's suppose you consider low income states. Now there, the argument has been, which has been going around for the past year, gained vociferous pitch during the electoral season, has been the fact that high income states such as Karnataka, such as Tamil Nadu, etc., they end up paying much greater amount of taxes as compared to the states such as, let's suppose, UP, Jharkhand, Odisha, Rajasthan, etc., Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, and all those. Now here the concept is that people of different areas, they end up sharing the burden of development in an inequitable manner. For example, let's suppose when we talk about the contribution or the GSDP, the gross state domestic product. Now the GSDP contribution by the various states, it is much more by the high income states. The low income states are never able to generate that much amount of revenue. That much amount of contribution to the economy is not there by the low income states. So once the GSDP of these high income states is greater, their expectation is that they should also be able to provide better services for the citizenry. For example, if we further simplify it, if Karnataka, for example, Karnataka is contributing significantly with the help of its industries. Now let's suppose in Karnataka, there are a lot of industries. So the expectation of the people would naturally be that the road should be better, the airport should be better, the electrical supply should be better, the civic amenities such as water supply, infrastructure overall should be better. Now for that, what is needed? Karnataka would require significant amount of expenditure. But for that expenditure, its own tax revenue is not adequate. It needs support from the center as well. And that support is in comparison less, and that support is more to the low income states. There is argument for and against for both of these. We'll come to the arguments of it. But here, that is the concept behind intragenerational inequity, that one particular portion is paying more as compared to the other for overall national development. Now here, the article also argues that, look, high income states such as Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, etc., they have worked quite significantly to reduce their revenue expenditure in the form of salaries, pensions, wages, etc. That is revenue expenditure. Now they have worked to reduce their revenue expenditure, whereas states such as UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, they still have a lot of revenue expenditure as compared to their GSDP. So there, they need to reduce that first of all, increase the tax that they are accruing, the tax that they are collecting, and then be able to fulfill their own requirements. But there's a long way to go. Unless and until we reach that point where these low income states, they achieve a level of prosperity, that intragenerational inequity is a reality of our times that we are living in. And that is where the Finance Commission and the Union government's fund devolution, that is questioned. That is the expectation laid from the budget as well. While intergenerational equity, how it can be achieved, we have talked about it. But intragenerational equity, how it can be achieved? That is something where we need to analyze it. So the analysis of intergenerational and intragenerational equity is simple. The basic root causes, each of the states need to have a better amount of tax collection, right? So tax collection needs to improve, right? That can be termed as a way forward as well. Tax collection needs to go up. only then will you be able to provide the services that you want to provide. Then secondly, one has to come out of the lens that, okay, I am giving more to the country's GDP, so I should get more. Because this is what is also referred to as in economic terms as the banker's ideology, that if someone has taken more loan, they have to pay more. But when we talk about national development, the country, the nation cannot develop with just a few developed states. Now you have to also look at it from the point of a kind of an opportunity. For example, let's suppose you have the low income state which is progressing. If the government is paying more amount of funds to the low income states, that means what? That fund, if they reduce their revenue expenditure, which is something which is very much required, then that fund will be required for capital asset creation, isn't it? Better infrastructure, better roads, better disaster management, better flood prevention, etc. Now these capital assets would lead to what? Would lead to development. Economic development will happen. Economic development will happen means what? Per capita income will improve. Per capita income overall for these low income states will lead to improvement. Once the per capita level improves, that is each and every individual, let's suppose in Odisha, in Rajasthan, they start earning more, what will happen? They will buy more things. They will now think of buying air conditioners, of air purifiers, every commodities, household commodities, capital assets, etc. they will buy. So that would improve the demand. Demand in the economy would improve. Now, when the demand in the economy improves, who will benefit? The states which are already at a significant upwards of industrialization, who have already had those industrial bases, those industries will now start producing more, isn't it? So, industrialized states will benefit. Industrial states will benefit, right? Now, when they benefit, what will happen? In those particular states, there will be more job creation. Again, fueling a kind of a virtuous cycle. So that job creation would again fuel the demand, and that would again lead to the growth of the developed states as well, right? So the developed states are already going to benefit, but the developing states or the low income states, they require that push. That is the argument behind providing more amount of funds to the low income states. If let's suppose you have a low income state and the center also provides them less funds. Now obviously those low income states, why do they have a less tax collection? Because you don't have that much economic activities, people are not earning that much. So if you don't have that much economic activity, where will you get the fund to construct a road or an airport? Now if you don't have a road or an airport, trade will not come to the state. So it is a vicious cycle. So for those states to come out of that, this is one of the easier solutions. Having said that, the Finance Commission, which gives its recommendations every 5 years, also needs to cater to the demography changes which have happened, also needs to cater to the various progressive policies brought by states such as Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, etc., so that the entire country is ready to move in unison rather than quibbling for some more amount of funds. So here, the way forward. Revenue expenditure by the states. Revenue expenditure needs to reduce quite significantly. And also, you have to understand that this tax collection, revenue expenditure is one side of the argument. The other side of the argument is the services that you are providing. The services that you are providing from the side of the government, that also needs to be efficient. There are multiple leakages in healthcare, educational sector, etc. that needs to be plugged in. Only then will you be able to have the citizenry having a greater household savings. So here, services, and we are talking about the government services, needs improvement. Other than that, even when the states, they are announcing schemes, they should come out with a detailed policy paper. For example, how do they intend to cater to these schemes? Where will the money for these schemes come from? Is it going to be a kind of a trade-off between developmental funds and the funds required for the scheme? Or is that going to be fulfilled from some of the borrowing or some of the loans? Or is it completely dependent on the fact that when the center will give us funds, we will implement the scheme, otherwise none of the programs will run? We have seen some of the state governments running into trouble because of that. So that is where you also need rationalization of schemes. Okay? While announcement itself. We have seen in the case of Andhra Pradesh how the white paper which has been brought by the new government indicates the woeful financial condition of Andhra Pradesh. So such condition is there in many of the states, just that the reportage is not there. So overall, even when you are writing the answer, please ensure that your answer is free from political biases. Give the example of certain states irrespective of the political bias that is present or irrespective of the political narrative that is going on. You have to ensure that your points are crisp. So a quick recap of what we have studied in this article, what this article tells us, that when it comes to devolution of funds from the center to the states, that is very much required for the states to fulfill its ideals and its requirements. Now, when we talk about the funds available, and that fund is basically either fulfilled through tax collection or is fulfilled through borrowings. Now, in order to ensure that there is intergenerational and intragenerational equity, there needs to be certain steps and certain measures which needs to be fulfilled. For example, the tax base needs to go higher up, better tax collections, etc. needs to be ensured so that the borrowings are not increasing. If you keep a cap or a lid on borrowings, then automatically intergenerational equity is ensured. For intragenerational equity, there is another perspective to look at the different amount of funds provided. But having said that, low income states are still very high on revenue expenditure. That needs to be corrected. Low income states have maximum amount of leakages in public schemes. That needs to be plugged in. Low income states, the education and health parameter needs to be reduced so that the household savings can increase, and there the funds which are then provided by the center, even if it is higher for a couple of decades, that will end up benefiting the entirety of the country, even the high income states. That is something you can write. So let us take a look at the practice question. Discuss the need to have intergenerational and intragenerational equity in tax devolution between the union and the states. Now that is a 10-marker, 150-word answer. Now here, what will you write in your introduction? In your introduction, do you directly introduce what is intergenerational and intragenerational equity? No. In your introduction, you focus on the aspect of tax devolution between the union and the states. So, you can start by the fact that the tax devolution from the central government forms a very important component of financing the state's expenditure. This is decided by the quinquennial Finance Commission reports, which take into matter the aspects of demography, development, etc. So here in the introduction, you have highlighted that it is essential. At the same time, who decides this devolution? It is as per the recommendations of the Finance Commission. That is something which you will write in the introduction. After that, once you have set this base, then you start with what do you mean by intergenerational equity? Talk about the concept of borrowings and taxes. Then talk about intragenerational equity. There you talk about the horizontal distribution in between the different states, the example of high income, low income. Draw a flowchart about how more funds to the low income can benefit, or the concerns of the high income states also you need to highlight. Eventually, you have to write a conclusion that this equity is a must. But what also needs to be taken care of is the development of a nation will happen when each parts of the country develop and not a lopsided development. If this was a 15-marker question, you could have also highlighted that if lopsided development happens, which is the case right now, western and southern belt are more developed, what has it led to? More migrations. And migrations create their own set of socio-economic issues. So that is where you can elaborate upon this if it is a 15-marker question. Okay. Now we come to the second article. Choosing the right track to cut post-harvest losses. What do we mean by post-harvest losses? So for agricultural sector, we have to understand that just the growth of the crops is not the completion of it. Once the crops are harvested or once the agricultural produce is harvested, after that it is transported to the mandis, then to the wholesalers, and after that eventual consumers. Now in that process, immediately after harvest, many of the times the crops are kept somewhere, and there also if there is unseasonal rainfall, then also the crops get destroyed. But significant amount of destruction and wastage happens in the form of or at the stage of agri-logistics. So that this article basically highlights about how agri-logistics is important, and at the same time how railways can be a desired medium for improving this agri-logistics. So here, agricultural income is something which has been a concern for the government ever since the 1960s. How to improve agricultural income? Numerous different committees have been set up. As recent or as late as the Ashok Dalwai committee to double the farm income. You had various committees giving various different recommendations. Now there it was identified that the post-harvest losses due to unseasonal rains many of the time is quite significant. That is where the crop insurance scheme, the Fasal Bima Yojana, the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, that comes into play. Even though there are some lacunae with regards to execution, implementation, coverage of that Fasal Bima Yojana, but nonetheless you have a coverage of that. But what about the agricultural losses which are happening during the logistics process? Now first of all, let us understand the logistics. So let's suppose you have a farmer, right? The farmer will produce some amount of goods. Now that goes to the mandis. How do you transport that? That is where lorries, tractors, etc. are used. So this is where the road connectivity needs to be very up to the mark. And how do you do that? The Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, that needs to be spruced up. After that, it is transported to the wholesalers across the country. How do you do that? With the help of rail plus road. Then after that goes to the retailers, and after that the consumers. Now this entire value chain is where significant amount of losses happen. I hope we are aware that when it comes to the farm to table inflation, that is the value that the farmers get, let's suppose for growing 1 kg of tomato, a farmer gets 2 rupees or 3 rupees. But when you and I, we will go to the market to buy the same tomatoes, we will get it at 50 rupees, 60 rupees. So that inflation is very high in India, right? It is amongst the highest in the world. Now, that means what? We consumers, we keep on paying much more. The farmers at the same time remain impoverished. Now, much of that inflation is accrued to the association of lot of middlemen. There are a lot of middlemen in the entire value chain. But then, logistics also occupies a significant role here. Now, in logistics, you have to understand that when it comes to, for example, perishable goods such as fruits, such as vegetables, right? Now, in this case, or even, for example, poultry products, meat products, right? Fishes, meat, etc. Now, they have a limited shelf life. It is not as if just like grains can be stored for months altogether, this can also be stored for months together. No. Majority or significant amount of our poultry products, of animal extract products, they get discarded at the port where they are basically sent. They don't even reach the market that is destined for them. So there is a loss of income because of that. Now, this is because of inefficient logistical management. Now, this is where the article argues that, look, various different farmers, not all the farmers can afford to send their goods, large amount of goods, through the railways or through the airways. The agricultural census reveals that close to around 86.7% of farmers in our country, they are small or marginal. Small or marginal farmers mean what? Very small amount or very small size of the land area, and they are unable to have a significant amount of production. Now, in that case, small and marginal farmers, how will they be able to send their goods properly? So that is where many of them, they send it by roads. For example, the perishable items, close to around 90% of our perishable items, they travel by road. Now, it has got its own carbon footprint, environmental, ecological damages, etc. But road transportation over long distance is also time taking. That is where the railways can come in. And for that, the railways can carry bulk amount of goods. Even if you consider the railways for themselves, majority of the revenue of the railways, does it come from the passengers? No. Majority of the revenue that the railways earn, it is basically by transportation of goods, be it metals, be it agricultural products, etc. So this will benefit the railways as well. So that is the argument behind the article, that improve this agri-logistics. How do you improve the agri-logistics? Include the railways to ensure that this transportation, this phase of transportation is as efficient as it can be. Now, certain steps can be taken which the government is already mulling up. For example, you had the recent announcement that the dedicated freight corridor, the Western Freight Corridor, they will be exempt from GST of 18%. Which means what? Transportation will get cheaper, isn't it? Once the logistics cost, they become cheaper, means what? Product price reduces. Product price reduces means what? You will already be able to have a hold on inflation. Inflation can be controlled, isn't it? Inflation can be controlled. So already your monetary policies, which are primarily directed towards controlling inflation, you will receive some amount of breather. But at the same time, when the product prices reduce, that will mean your overall exports will increase. Why? Because now your goods are more competitive in the international market, so the overall exports will increase. As the overall exports increase, that means what? Income improves. Income level improves. So this is one of the way of achieving an increased farm income. And how do you do that? By integration. Integration along the railway routes, having more logistical hubs, having more containers. For example, during the time of the COVID pandemic, there was a lot of issue in terms of road transportation. So the government came up with the concept of Kisan Rail. Now in that Kisan Rail, what did the government do? You had specialized containers where the perishable goods were transported through those containers. Now just that small step reduced the amount of post-harvest losses of various different farmers. The article has argued that farmers in Nashik, they benefited almost up till around rupees 5,000 per quintal. So that would automatically improve your income level, right? So Kisan Rail, special designed containers can be used. At the same time, the railways has basically gone for, and you would also have seen many of the railway wagons now, they carry fully loaded trucks for easier loading and unloading of the goods and better transmission and transportation of the goods. They end up carrying these trucks. So that also, those services also needs to be more prevalent. And here, efficient transportation can happen with the operationalization of the freight corridors. Those freight corridors, while the Eastern Freight Corridor is operational, Western Freight Corridor, some portion of it near Maharashtra is still incomplete due to land acquisition problems. That needs to be sorted out, and then we can have better agri-logistics. So the railways will benefit, the farmers will benefit. Railways already, they lack the enough amount of money that they can invest in to improve their operationalization, and they will get more revenue. So it will be a win-win situation for both the sectors. Okay? Now, increase in the farm income cannot be attained without improvement in agri-logistics comment. Now here in the introduction, you talk about that agri-logistics or agricultural logistics forms a very vital part of the value chain that oftentimes increases the farm price or the produce price. You mentioned about the relevance of agri-logistics. Then in the body, draw that flowchart of agri-logistics, talk about that where there are significant amount of losses. Talk about the fact that while majority of the grains, they are transported by railways, but when it comes to perishable items, still you have close to around 90% of the perishable items being transported by roadways. That leads to inefficiencies, delays, and eventual destruction or the perishing of those goods, leading to loss of income. So after that, once you have discussed about the problem, then talk about the way forward. Second part of your body should, in a point-wise manner, talk about what can be done. So for example, the farm to mandi connectivity needs to be improved by better implementation of the Gram Sadak Yojana and better road constructions. Then you have to talk about the integration of rail transportation. You can give the example of Kisan Rail, the truck transport by the railways. Talk about the special container bogies or the coaches that the railways can come up with, the establishment of logistical hubs, cold storage stations in between these logistical hubs, and then talk about the aspect of how improved logistics will end up improving the income level. This is something which you need to depict. Okay? Now, after that, we move to the next topic. The next topic is a kind of a topic which has been in news for quite some time now and has been a major worry for a country like India. That is the lack or the dearth of jobs. Now, unemployment is one of the major concerns of the country as we move ahead. That is why before every electoral season and during the electoral season, it is jobs, jobs and jobs which dominate the narrative. Now here, there is a reality. It is a reality that every year India ends up churning up huge amount of population into the employment sector, into the job generation sector. But then not all the people get jobs. That leads to unemployment that eventually will impact the economy. As of now, being a youthful population, we have majority of the population which is below 35 years of age, which will enter into the working age group. Now that being able to enter into the working age group means they will be able to contribute to the economy as well. Now that is what various different countries of the world have utilized in order to fuel their growth. So this is what is referred to as the demographic dividend. That is the benefit that you get owing to your population characteristic. Demographic dividend. Isn't it? Now this demographic dividend is very, very high. Now here the possibility is very high. But the reality is also the fact that if, let's suppose, you are unable to provide those quality jobs, means what? Then in that case, the number of unemployed youth is going to be very high. The number of unemployed youth means there will be less income, social issues, more confrontation, many of the times disorder in the society. So that demographic disaster is what is something that we have to be afraid of. That this demographic dividend should not turn out into a demographic disaster, right? So for that, what do we need? In order to prevent this, what do we need? We need jobs. Now here also, there is a limitation, and that is, why don't we have enough jobs? Expectation of the population and expectation of the government as well, or limitation of the government. Now, in many parts of our country, we have the expectation that the government should provide jobs. Now, it is not the days of the 70s and the 80s or 60s when the government would come up with a large industrial base that, okay, Indian Oil is opening up a plant here. Everyone who has passed class 8 or class 10th enroll as an apprentice. Those of you who are graduates will be as executives, and you had en masse job applications, 5,000 vacancies, 4,000 vacancies, etc. So there's a restriction. You don't have those PSUs being able to generate jobs to that extent. Even when we talk about the banks, the public sector banks, they have reduced their headcount by around 11,000 over the past year. So why is that? Is it because those companies now they don't want to give jobs? No. With the development of technology, the requirement of those low-skill jobs is not there anymore, isn't it? So here, technological advancement is something, technological advancement or development. That is also something which has basically hit the low-skill jobs. Now, for those low-skill jobs, you will have robots or machines who will do that, or maybe that is not required anymore. Oftentimes, you hear about the news stories that in railways, this much vacancies there, 3 lakh vacancies there, etc. Now, the immediate public perception is that 3 lakh people can get jobs. But the reality of the matter is also that those jobs are not required anymore. For example, you have separate jobs in railways for ensuring someone stands there, manually does a particular job. Now, that is something done by automatic signaling process. So, those jobs are not existent anymore because of development of technology, right? So, this is one of the limitations. Second limitation is the government jobs. Now, the government can only generate so much jobs, right? The government has got a limitation of capacity. For example, ideally what should be there? There should be the best quality of primary education centers or the primary schools, secondary schools, etc., higher secondary schools in almost all the districts. Now, that would generate jobs for the teachers. For that, you need quality people as well. But jobs would be generated similarly. For example, for paramedical staff, if you have well-developed hospitals in all the districts of the country, that will provide jobs as well. Better services to the citizens also. But there's a limitation. Be it the state government or the central government, they don't have those many schools. They don't have those many hospitals. So as a result of that, there's a limitation on the government jobs as well, right? Despite the fact that you have greater amount of vacancy, for example, in forest services, foreign services of the country. But our training capability is limited. The amount of individuals that we can train, that is limited. So that is where again the restriction comes. So this is another restriction. The third limitation is basically the lack of job profile from agriculture to manufacturing. Our manufacturing sector has not picked up in the same pace as is the case with the industrialized nations or as recently as China's example. So our overburdening of agricultural sector is still present. Around 45% of our population, as per the periodic labor force survey, around 45% of our population is still involved in agriculture. So that transition from agriculture to manufacturing has not happened. Why? Because of lack of development of manufacturing sector, isn't it? This is a major issue. That is something that the government of the day needs to cater to at the state level, at the central level. Various different governments over the past have tried to improve the manufacturing sector, but this has not worked. If the manufacturing sector booms, that is when you will have the implication in the services sector, etc. And you can have more labor which will get then transitioned from primary sector to secondary sector. That will create scope in all the areas for more jobs. So this is also a requirement. But then there's a limitation in the sense that you have industrialists of the country, leading industrialists of the country. They talk about the fact that majority of the graduates of the country, they are unemployable. Now, few of them, let's assume they are lying, they are industrialists, they have lot of money, etc., etc., the criticism that is leveled at them. But there is a reality hidden there. The amount of learning outcomes that you have from the graduation colleges of the country, that is quite appalling in many of the areas. So once we focus on the limitations of the government, now, limitations of government, now we focus on the limitations of individuals. Now here, we still have people having a normal diploma or people having the basic level of educational proficiency. Now, for them, the expectation is sky high, but the reality of the world is that such jobs are not there anymore. Right? Be it any of the leading industries of the world that you consider, be it Tesla, be it Apple, be it Google, be it Microsoft. Every year, lakhs of people apply for those jobs. And I'm talking about the high-skilled individuals from the best of the colleges of the world. But very few get through. Why? That is the stringent requirement of our times. Right? So here, one of the major factor is lack of required skill. Now, why is there a lack of required skill? Is it the fact that the individuals don't want to learn? No. Our educational system needs to improve there. Our educational system is still largely theoretical. It has to transition into the aspect of practical. So that is where you have the issue of education system. Then many of the individuals, they have not yet upskilled. That upskilling is not there. For example, let's suppose I knew basic computer programming in C++. Now the world has changed and everyone is using, let's suppose, Python. Now I need to learn Python. I need to go for machine learning if I need to have my role or if I visualize my role anywhere. So that means upskilling is required. So lack of upskilling. Another aspect is over-reliance on government jobs. That needs to change. We need to have that entrepreneurial spirit in the population, which is something that is happening. Already, India being considered to be one of the emerging areas of startups. So these will generate more jobs. So the aim should be, rather than having job seekers, we should have job creators. For that, the government has to go for reskilling, upskilling mission, improve the industry to institution connect between the educational institutions and the industry. What is required, that needs to be improved at multiple levels. Only then will we have an improvement in the job scenario. Going ahead, as the budget is going to be presented, you will have one of the major challenges of the government is to cater to this job creation. And how will the government be able to do that? One of the ways is go for faster economic development. As per estimates, India needs to develop at a rate of around 7.5% to 8% in order to have better job creation. And that needs to happen for at least a couple of decades. So that is something which the government should ensure. Better private participation in the job sector or the growth of the private sector will also create more opportunities, reduce burden in the government sector, and thereby get rid of this unemployment. If this is not taken care of, we are staring at a situation of a demographic disaster. Okay? Now, after this, we move to the next topic, and that is the problems with sub-caste reservations. Now, Supreme Court in the month of February basically had talked about the fact that it will take a relook in the aspect or the matter of reservation within a particular group. For example, within the scheduled caste, the various different communities within the scheduled caste, should they be provided a preferential treatment in reservation or different share of that reservation, or should it be treated as a monolith? Now, that is what the Supreme Court observation has been. So, this article talks about the requirement or the analysis of that subcaste. Why, if at all, there needs to be an improvement, and what are the parameters based upon which the subcaste reservation needs to look at. But before that, as a candidate, you need to know the background of the story. So, the background of the story goes to 2004. That is when an important Supreme Court judgment came in the case of E.V. Chinnaya versus State of Andhra Pradesh. Now, there also, the discussion at that point of the time was that can the state legislatures announce a separate amount of reservation within the scheduled caste, that within the scheduled caste group A will have, or let's suppose you have A, B, C and D. So, A will have XYZ amount of reservation within the larger amount of scheduled caste. B will have another amount of reservation. Should that be done or not? And can the state legislatures do so? So, Supreme Court at that point of time issued a scathing remark that, look, if you are dividing the subcaste and then providing reservation there, that basically would amount to violation of Article 14 of the Constitution, right to equality. So, it had stated that any subcaste classification of the scheduled caste would violate Article 14. And it said that even if there needs to be certain requirement or certain provisions provided, it is the onus which lies on the Parliament, not on the state legislature. So, Parliament and not the state legislatures can exclude castes deemed to be scheduled caste from the presidential list under Article 341 of the Constitution. That has been the argument of the Supreme Court. Now, in February this year, the 7-judge bench, and headed by the Chief Justice of India, they basically said that we will have a relook at this, that whether the subcaste or within a larger grouping, let's suppose you consider the larger grouping of scheduled caste, all the various groups within the scheduled caste, should they enjoy equitable amount of reservation or should they have different amount of reservation? Now, the argument that the judges at that point of time made was that, look, even within the larger grouping of SCs, you have certain groups who have done well. Now, if you have done well, why should you continue to avail the same amount of reservation as the groups which have not done well? Shouldn't there be a greater amount of attention, focus and policy intervention provided? Let's suppose A has done much better, B has done much better, C and D, they are languishing, they are not doing better. So, the argument that the judges posed was that can't we have A and B choosing to move out of this reservation and all that reservation focused on those groups which are not doing well? So, that was the argument due to which the Supreme Court said we will take a relook at it. Now, we have to understand that caste discrimination in our country is a reality. We cannot shy away from that. Has been a reality for ages now. Now, due to which there has been a kind of an inequity in terms of opportunities, in terms of economic outcome, etc., and also in terms of education, development, and all the various different parameters. Now, as a consequence of that, and in order to get rid of that, you had, even during the time of the Constituent Assembly and even before that, pre-independence, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he basically struggled for almost 30 years to convince the population and to convince everyone the requirement of this reservation. And basically, what the government is doing now is something, and the governments of the day have been doing now, is a continuation of the thought process of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So, when we talk about the policy instruments that the government is using in order to get rid of the caste discrimination, in order to provide equal opportunities, the policy instruments, they revolve around 3 important pillars. One of them is legal safeguards against caste discrimination. Any individual should not be discriminated based upon the caste. Fundamental rights, Article 15, Article 16, Article 17, all of them, they basically ensure this, that you don't have discrimination based on caste. Then reservation in legislature, public jobs and educational institutions. This is done so that they have a better representation. The caste groups who are, let's suppose, disadvantaged in terms of their how they have been brought up, the opportunities that they have got till now, there will be some parity. And also measures to improve ownership of capital assets like land. These are the three policy parameters based upon which all the governments function, and these are the policy parameters that even Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was a great advocate of. But here, B.R. Ambedkar basically argued that, look, the first two of them, legal safeguards as well as reservation, these first two, they will cater to the present situation. The discrimination that the people are facing in present, that will improve. But what about those who did not have enough money ever to go to the school itself? How will they apply for higher education? What about those who did not have enough amount of avenue to have a shelter over their head? How will you ensure that that person is brought to the same table? So that is where the third aspect, that is ownership of assets, that is an important parameter. So here this article argues that while the first two are a catering to the present situation, but there have been past issues, past discriminations and atrocities due to which the people are languishing at the level they are. The social and economic backwardness that the Constitution talks about, this article says that it is partly because of the lack of ownership of capital assets. They did not have that many assets, that is why they could not study, and so on. So rather than simply providing that sub-caste reservation, what this article says is that one should focus and carry out deeper research that within that caste group, which are the population who have got some amount of assets. Now those groups generally tend to do better, and those groups who don't have those assets, provide them the assets. How? By government interventions. In that case, the sub-caste grouping of the reservation need not be done. So that requires a kind of a recalibration of our entire strategy. So that is something you can write in a way forward as well. Now, here, analysis of asset ownership, assessment of asset ownership of the larger group. If that ownership is not there, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, provide that. Basic infrastructure, Ujjwala Yojana, Har Ghar Jal Yojana, provide that basic facilities. Provide that free education, which is the provision already. Now, once they get that level playing field, then the future generation will not have that issue anymore. Also, there needs to be a recalibration and analysis of benefits accrued to the groups. Now, this need not be exclusionary in nature. What do we mean by that? For example, when you analyze who have benefited from reservation within scheduled caste, within scheduled tribe, it is not always that, okay, now we will not provide them reservation. It also has to, the analysis needs to be done in order to understand which groups are actually languishing behind. If you don't have that proper report, how will you correct your reservation policy? Correction of reservation policy meaning that those people, maybe they are not able to reach the institutions itself. They are not able to reach the schools or colleges itself, right? So that needs to be recalibrated and analyzed. Okay, so this is what the article talks about, that if you want to have an improvement within the subcaste, each of these policy measures, they need not be taken into isolation, that okay, caste discrimination is not there means now everybody is good. Reservation is there means everyone is good. No, all of these are complementary in nature. They supplement each other, and the overall aim is to provide that level playing field to the individuals who have had social and economic backwardness beforehand. Okay, so that is the way forward you can talk about. Now coming to the next article on political representation of women. This has appeared in the text portion in the page 7 of the newspaper. Now, this article talks about the broader aspect of political representation required for women. Now, recently concluded UK elections basically saw a record number of women MPs being elected. Overall, they constitute around 40% of the legislature now. Even when we talk about the numbers in, let's suppose, South Africa, numbers in, let's suppose, US, everywhere the amount or the number of women legislators is significantly higher. Now they acquire a significant proportion of the elected representatives. Now, when we talk about countries like India, for example, despite the fact that 106th amendment to the constitution has provided the women's reservation bill and the women's reservation is now a reality. Now that will come into play once the census figures are released. We will come to that. But this election, we have had a woman representation of close to around 18%. Right. So in the 18th Lok Sabha, it is around 14% of the women population of MPs that we have, which is significantly low and much is desired. Now here the debate that has been talked about is when you provide that reservation, should you provide that intra-party reservation to women or should you provide a broader reservation in the legislature, which will be beneficial? So there are evidences where when you have the quota in political parties, then those countries have done better. When you talk about Pakistan, Bangladesh, the subcontinent areas, you have the quota, women quota in the parliament, but no quota in the political parties. So that is where the impact is significant. Where you have quota in political parties, there you have more women being able to reach the legislature. Why is that? That is basically because of the fact that political parties, let's suppose they have each of the political party, let's suppose they have 100 legislators, let's suppose. Now, out of those 100, if the political parties themselves ensure that 50 will be women, 50 will be men. Now, out of those 100, few will win, few will lose. There is a greater chance of more women winning out of these as compared to fixing a ceiling or a reservation in the overall parliament. So that is where political parties need to take that baton forward. Now, not required that you have a mandatory rule in the statute or a constitutional amendment that all the political parties need to have this much amount. That is not required. That can be a voluntary act provided by the political parties themselves. It has been seen that in our country, the article says that the highest or significant amount of women representation is by Trinamool Congress, around 38%. Right. Then you have the BJP, the Congress, all of them, they have around 12 to 13%. Now, this is where once the intra-party reservation or the intra-party representation will improve, that is when overall situation will improve. Now, where does the women reservation bill, which has been passed by the parliament, where does that come into the picture? So that was passed as per the 106th amendment to the constitution. Now, this will be implemented when? After the census. After the census. Now, census of 2021 has not been carried out initially because of the COVID pandemic and later on because of the electoral cycle. So that needs to be carried out immediately. And after that census figures are released, then we have to observe one electoral cycle to look at what are the implications, how many women representatives actually reach there. Then we will get a proper idea about what are the lacunae in the system, and meanwhile, the various different political parties would do well if they provide that intra-party representation. Okay? So in this, first of all, in this article, what are the points that you need to note? Is there a need for greater women representation in the executive, in the legislature? Absolutely yes. Why? Greater amount of women representation means social equity. At the same time, you will ensure greater women participation in the labor force as well. You will have better issues resolution for significant amount of population as well. Now, that would also mean that you will have a greater amount of political participation from the ground level upwards. So, there will be significant benefits associated. Secondly, once you provide that political representation, that would also ensure development of the grassroots women empowerment that you study about. So, women reservation is required. How do you achieve, or women representation is required? How do you achieve that representation? By quota in the parliament? That is something that this 106th amendment does, or that quota in the political parties. Now, the result of this is something that we will be able to see after the census, the delimitation exercise, etc., which will happen. But then the political parties, if they voluntarily do so, that will be a significantly low-hanging fruit which can yield good results. Okay? Now, then, what does Maharashtra's public security bill stipulate? So, the Maharashtra cabinet and the Maharashtra government has basically passed a bill, and that is the public security bill. Now, there is a lot of criticism which has been leveled against the government that this is a draconian law, this will curb dissent, and so on. The argument on the side of the government has been that this is to fight urban Naxalism. The argument on the side of the government has been that, look, while on the ground the forces are fighting the Naxals or the left-wing extremists, but at the same time you have issues because the surrounding states such as Telangana, Odisha, etc. all have these public safety laws which basically does not allow these Naxals to operate from the urban environment, meaning Maharashtra is turning out to be a hub of these Naxal operations, particularly the region around the Gadchiroli district. So that is where the government has given this argument to bring forward the law and ensure a better public order at the same time. Okay, so that has been the argument. So here the context is that the Maharashtra government last week tabled the Special Public Security Bill 2024 to tackle urban Naxalism. Okay, this is the main context about it. Now here, the key provisions. What are the key provisions and what is the criticism leveled out? So one of the key provisions here, if you will observe, is the fact that people now can be arrested significantly for unlawful activities, something which is very similar to the concept of UAPA, right? Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, or in the case of Maharashtra, you have a much more stringent law, that is MACOCA, the Control of Organized Crime. Now, MACOCA in itself has been criticized throughout the decades for being very, very draconian, and the government had argued that it was required to prevent the gang wars and to get a control over the underworld, which was underworld operations in the region of Mumbai. So, MACOCA is there, UAPA is there. Now, what was the need to come forward with this another law, another stringent law? So, understand what are the key instruments here. First of all, it empowers the state to designate any particular organization as unlawful organization, and the offenses are any person being a member of that organization, being a member and raise funds for that organization, management of that organization, or attempt or commit to plan any unlawful activity, that person will get liable to be arrested under this, or that will fall under the purview of this. Now, there is a lot of vagueness in the terming or the framing of this law. That vagueness means what? It opens a can of worms. Any individual, now any organization, let's suppose the criticism which we talk about, any organization which is not on the good side of the government. Now, there can be arrests. Unlawful organization on the charges of inciting or disturbing the public order. Now, here under this act or under this law, a person can be arrested without a warrant as well. And under it is non-bailable. So that means you will be languishing in jail unless and until the court provides you with the relief. That is a major issue here. So here, basically, how is it different from UAPA? So basically, the bill expands its definition of unlawful activity. bringing under its ambit everything from being a menace to public order, to interfering with the administration of law, to generating fear and apprehension in public, and preaching disobedience of law. Anything can be termed under this. Now, under UAPA, what you have is, if let's suppose as an individual, a person is charged under UAPA, then a tribunal decides that whether it is a lawful conviction or not. Here, you have a 3-member panel, and those eligible to become the judges of the High Court, those people, not necessarily the judges of the High Court, even if you are eligible, if you have that qualification to be eligible to be appointed as judges of High Court, then you will be in that panel, and thereby you can take that decision. So again, adding to the vagueness. Now, whenever a stringent law is vague, it opens up opportunities of exploitation. That is why Supreme Court had made a serious judgment and a serious argument. Supreme Court had basically observed that stricter the law, more clear should the provisions be. That only under this you will be arrested. Only under this you will be provided bail. If you don't have that, then people will languish in jail for a long period of. Those of them who have maybe some connect, some amount of means, they can file mercy petitions, they can come out as well. But those who are simply charged and incarcerated on the suspicion, then there will be a significant issue associated. So that is a major reservation, a major criticism against this, that when you already had stringent laws like UAPA and MACOCA, why did you need this public safety bill? And the argument of the government is that Maharashtra is turning out to be the safe refuge because the competing or the nearby states, the entire red corridor or the left-wing extremism corridor, which extends from Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Maharashtra, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and the parts of northern Karnataka. Argument of the Maharashtra government is all the other states have had this law. So all the people are taking refuge in the urban areas of Maharashtra, and they are providing logistical support to the Naxals. They are basically providing them safe refuges and thereby aiding and abating the Naxal activities. As a result of that, people suffer, security forces suffer. So you need to be aware of both sides of the arguments in favor and the criticism associated. What should be the way forward? The way forward, in simple term, is better law enforcement. Police reforms, law enforcement, better law enforcement. If it is carried out, then you don't need these stringent laws to be there anymore. And also, the pendency of cases before the court also means many of the wrongful incarcerations are not corrected in time. Okay? Now, after that, we take a look at a couple of articles relevant for your prelims. Now, this is the article which has appeared. This talks about the report which the railways have filed to explain and the investigative report for the accident of the Kanchenjunga Express. Now, as per the report, Railways has observed that basically this was an accident waiting to happen. That was the headline of that basic report, the gist of the report. Because this was a section of railway line which was undergoing maintenance, and all the drivers, they were not the loco pilots, they were not sensitized so as to what speed they should be moving upon in this particular area. The normal procedure that the railway follows is the fact that, let's suppose this is a section which is undergoing maintenance. So the normal procedure is that the maximum speed of the train should be 15 km per hour. And before every defective signal, they should wait for 1 minute. And then they should move forward. This is the procedure. But all the loco pilots, they were not aware that this is the procedure that they need to follow. As a result of that, what happened? You had one of the passenger trains which was moving ahead and moving ahead at this speed, the stipulated speed. But the trains following it, they were not following the norms. At this particular stretch, you had 5 different trains which entered. Only one was following the norm, and that was the passenger train in front. So while it had stopped before a faulty signal for 1 minute to continue again, it was stuck from behind. So that was the issue. One of the major issue or the recommendations of the committee findings was that there was not enough walkie-talkie sets available with the loco pilots. And it was found out that the Make in India provision for acquisition or acquiring these sets has been a limitation. If there would have been enough walkie-talkie sets, then that communication could have been given to the loco pilots as well. But that walkie-talkie set was not there. Now, for this, the railway has relaxed the norms. But the recommendation, a strong recommendation by the railways has been to install the Kavach system, the Kavach anti-collision system. Now, what does the Kavach system work upon? What is the principle here? So basically, let's suppose you have a railway line and you already have a train here. Now, if you have another train which is coming, approaching this on the same line, it will be forced to stop automatically. How? So, first of all, you have radio frequency IDs, RFID chips. RFID chips are installed every 1 kilometer. Every kilometer. So they give a tracking of where the train is or where a particular load is. Now that is transmitted with the help of satellite communication. Let's suppose that is transmitted with the help of satellite communication. Now, if the distance between the two coaches or the two trains that reduces significantly, then that is communicated by the satellite which is tracking as per the RFID. Automatic emergency brakes are applied and the train comes to a standstill. The train comes to a halt. So this is the Kavach system which has been developed in-house by RDSO, the Research and Development Wing of Indian Railways, that has developed it. So that Kavach system needs to be installed. So here for your prelims, what do you need to know? On what basis, what principle that Kavach system works, anti-collision system works, and also who has developed it. Okay. Now, the last article. It talks about the fact that public expenditure, public capital expenditure has reduced drastically in Q1 of this fiscal year because of the polling season. You had the polling season going on for around a month and a half, couple of months almost. Now, during that period of time, capital expenditure has reduced. Manufacturing sector has taken a significant amount of hit. Infrastructure sector has also taken a significant amount of hit. Slight respite was provided because the private investment has increased. Now, why is this an important news? Because India's growth story for the past few years has been driven only by public expenditure. That is the government expenditure. Government is spending on building roads, government is spending on building railways, government is spending on building infrastructure. That has been the major growth driver of the country. The public expenditure is more, private participation has been stymied, has been less. That is the story of India's lopsided growth story for the few years now. Now, if the public expenditure also takes a back seat, that means our overall growth will get slowed down and it will have wider implications. So there is a green shoot or a silver lining available that the private investment has increased, but at the same time, the government investment in the critical infrastructure projects, that needs to be augmented quite significantly. Okay, so that is all for the discussion and analysis for today. We have discussed these various articles relevant for the mains, prelims, etc. I hope that this session has been helpful to you. Try to create answers on your own about the questions that we have discussed. And if you have liked the content of the video, put it in the comment section, click on the like, share and the subscribe button. Till we meet again tomorrow, take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.
NCERT books are unavoidable to crack the IAS exam. Not only is the content of these books authentic, but these books also help a civil services aspirant to build conceptual clarity. And most importantly, lots of questions in the civil services examination are directly asked from NCERT books. But the aspirants often find it difficult to cover these books, or worse, they even end up ignoring these books. We at Unacademy IAS English are going to make the reading and understanding of the NCERT books easier. We present NCERT Fundamentals course, a free initiative of Unacademy IAS English. What are the highlights of this program? Comprehensive coverage of the most relevant NCERT books for the civil services exam. Prelims and mains practice questions in each session to test your understanding of the fundamental concepts. This course begins from 12th of July every day at 6 p.m. right here on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to the channel now.